The sky above burned orange and red. Fire fell from the clouds like rain, and the great crystal towers that had stood for 10,000 years now crumbled into dust. The people ran through the streets of their capital city, looking for shelter that did not exist. There was nowhere to hide from the death that came from above. High Counselor Ra stood on the balcony of the council hall and watched his world die. His silver skin was covered in ash, and his large dark eyes reflected the flames that consumed everything he had ever known. Behind him, the other council members argued in loud voices about what to do next, but Ra knew there was nothing left to do. They had lost. The Dominion had come 3 cycles ago. Their warships had appeared in the sky without warning, hundreds of dark vessels that blocked out the sun. They were conquerors. They had destroyed a dozen civilizations before coming to, and they would destroy a dozen more after. They were simply next on their list. They had tried to fight. They had sent their exploration ships against the war fleet, but it was like throwing stones at a mountain. Ships were built for science and discovery. They had no weapons, no armor, no shields strong enough to stop missiles. In the first battle, they lost 40 ships in less than an hour. After that, there were no more battles. There was only running and hiding and dying. Counselor Saul came to stand beside Ra. She was old, older than anyone else on the council, and her silver skin had faded to gray, but her eyes were still sharp. "There is one option we have not tried," she said quietly. Ra did not look at her. "The beacon." "Yes, the ancient beacon." The beacon was a relic from the founding era, built by the first who had traveled to the stars. It was a machine that could send a message across the entire galaxy, a cry for help that any spacefaring species could hear. They had never used it. They had never needed to use it, until now. "The beacon has not been activated in 8,000 years, Ra said. "We do not even know if it still works." "Then we will find out." Another explosion shook the ground beneath their feet. In the distance, a crystal spire collapsed, and the screams of the dying echoed through the burning streets. Ra closed his eyes. "Activate it," he said. The beacon was kept in a vault beneath the council hall. It took 3 hours to prepare it, 3 hours during which the bombardment continued without pause. When the machine finally came to life, it hummed with an energy that made the air feel thick and heavy. Counselor Saul pressed her hand to the control panel and spoke the words that would be sent across the stars. "This is, we are under attack. Our people are dying. We call for aid from any who can hear us. Please help us." The message went out at faster than light speed, spreading across the galaxy like ripples in a pond. It reached 1,000 worlds, 1,000 civilizations, 1,000 governments and councils and ruling bodies. And one by one, the answers came back. The collective was the first to respond. Their message was polite and formal. They expressed great sympathy for the situation. They wished them well in their struggle against they would not be sending ships. The Federation responded next. They offered diplomatic support. They would bring the matter before the Galactic Council at the next scheduled meeting, which was in 6 months. They were sure that something could be worked out, eventually. The clans were more direct. They were willing to fight but they wanted payment. 30 billion credits delivered in advance. The treasury held less than 2 billion. They wished them luck. More responses came in over the following hours. Some species did not reply at all. Others sent long messages explaining why they could not help. A few offered prayers and good wishes. No one offered ships. No one offered soldiers. No one offered hope. Ross sat in the communication center and read each message as it arrived. With each rejection, something inside him grew colder. The galaxy was vast and full of life, and not one civilization cared enough to save his people from extinction. They would all watch from a safe distance as they died, and then they would go on with their lives as if nothing had happened. He was about to order the beacon shut down when one final message arrived. It came from a distant arm of the galaxy, a region that they had barely explored. The species that sent it was unknown to him. He had never heard their name. He did not know anything about them. The message was short, only 4 words. "We are on our way." It was signed by someone named Captain Daniel, commanding a vessel called the Relentless Dawn, representing a species called humanity. Counselor Saul looked at the message with confusion on her face. "Humans, I do not know this species." Neither did anyone else on the council. A quick search of the database revealed almost nothing. Humanity was a young species, barely a century into interstellar travel. There was a small blue planet called Earth, located in an unremarkable solar system on the edge of the galaxy. They had no significant presence in galactic affairs. They had never attended a galactic council meeting. They were, by every measure, completely unimportant. "Why would they help us?" Counselor asked. "They are nothing, they have nothing to gain from this." "Perhaps they do not want anything," Saul said. "Perhaps they simply want to help." The other council members laughed at this idea. No one helped strangers for free. There was always a price, always a hidden motive, always something to gain. That was how the galaxy worked. That was how it had always worked. But Ra did not laugh. He stared at the message on the screen, at those 4 simple words, and he felt something he had not felt in a long time. Hope. "How long until they arrive?" he asked. The communication officer checked her instruments. "Their fleet is moving at maximum hyperspace velocity. At their current speed, they will reach in approximately 6 days. 6 days. They would conquer the entire planet in 6 days. They would be dead or enslaved before the humans ever arrived. But maybe not. Maybe somehow they could hold on. Maybe they could find a way to survive until help came." Ra stood up and faced his council. For the first time since they arrived, he looked like the leader he was supposed to be. "We will fight," he said. "We will hide. We will do whatever we must to stay alive for 6 more days. Help is coming. We just have to survive long enough to meet it." The council members looked at each other. They were scared. They were tired. They had already given up. But something in Ra's voice gave them strength. Something in those 4 words from a species they had never heard of gave them reason to believe. They would hold on. They would survive. And in 6 days they would find out if this strange species called humanity was worth believing in. Above their heads the bombardment continued. But for the first time they did not run. They hid in the shelters and tunnels beneath the city, and they waited and they hoped. Help was coming. The Relentless Dawn dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the system, and 46 other ships followed behind it. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge and looked out at the stars through the main. Somewhere ahead, beyond the darkness, a civilization was dying. "All ships report ready, Captain," said Commander Lisa. She was standing at his side, her dark hair pulled back in a tight braid, her eyes fixed on the tactical display. "The fleet is in formation and awaiting your orders." Daniel nodded slowly. He was a tall man in his early 40s, with gray starting to show at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He had been a soldier for 20 years, and those years showed on his face. He had fought in 3 wars, lost 2 ships, and buried more friends than he cared to remember. But he had never faced anything like this before. "What do we know about the enemy?" he asked. Lieutenant pulled up the sensor data on the main screen. "The fleet consists of approximately 140 warships, sir. They have us outnumbered 3 to 1. Their ships are faster than ours, and their weapons have a longer range. Their shields are rated at approximately twice the strength of our own." Daniel looked at the numbers without expression. "And our advantages?" There was a long silence on the bridge. No one wanted to say what they were all thinking. Finally, Commander spoke. "We have better coffee, sir." A few people laughed. It was not a funny joke, but they needed to laugh. They needed to feel something other than fear. Daniel allowed himself a small smile. "Then we will just have to make do. Lieutenant, begin scanning the planet. I want to know the situation on the ground." The scan took several minutes. When it was complete, the results were grim. They had been devastated by orbital bombardment. Major cities were in ruins. Millions of people were dead. The survivors were hiding in underground shelters, waiting for an end that seemed certain. The fleet is positioned in orbit around the planet, reported. They have established a blockade. Nothing is getting in or out without their permission. Then we will ask nicely, Daniel said. Open a channel to the command ship. The communication officer pressed a button, and a moment later, a face appeared on the main screen. It was not a pleasant face. There were reptilian creatures, with dark scales and yellow eyes and mouths full of sharp teeth. This particular wore the elaborate armor of a war commander, and he looked at the human fleet with obvious contempt. I am War Commander, they said. Identify yourselves and state your purpose in this system. Daniel stepped forward. I am Captain Daniel of the United Earth Defense Fleet. We have received a distress call from the people of. You will cease your attack and withdraw from this system immediately. The war commander stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. It was an ugly sound like rocks grinding together. Humans said, I have heard of your species. You are a joke, a primitive race from an insignificant world. Your ships are relics, your weapons are toys. You have no idea what you face. Daniel did not blink. You are right about one thing. You have no idea what you face. The war commander's laughter stopped. His yellow eyes narrowed. You threaten me. With 40 ships against my 140, you are either very brave or very stupid. Perhaps both, Daniel admitted. But we did not come here to make threats. We came here to help these people, and we will not leave until they are safe. Leaned closer to the screen. Then you will die with them. You have 1 hour to withdraw from this system. After that, I will destroy your fleet and add your species to the list of civilizations that fell before the Dominion. The screen went dark. Commander let out a long breath. Well, that went well. Daniel turned to face his crew. They were all looking at him, waiting for orders, waiting for guidance. Some of them were scared. He could see it in their eyes, but not one of them suggested retreat. Not one of them asked to leave. Listen to me, he said. In 1 hour, we are going to fight the most powerful enemy we have ever faced. We are outnumbered. We are, by every reasonable measure, we should not be here. He paused, looking at each of them in turn. But we are here. We are here because someone called for help. We are here because we believe that matters. We are here because that is who we are. Lieutenant Commander Price spoke up from the fighter squadron station. Sir, my pilots are ready. Just give the word. Chief Engineer Torres nodded from her station. Engineering is standing by, Captain. Whatever you need, we will make it happen. Around the bridge, other officers voiced their support. They were scared, yes, but they were also determined. They had chosen to be here. They had chosen to fight. Daniel felt a surge of pride. This was why he loved serving with these people. This was why he had spent 20 years in uniform, not for glory or power or recognition. For moments like this, when ordinary people stood up against impossible odds because it was the right thing to do. All ships, this is the captain, he said over the fleet-wide channel. Battle stations, we engage in 1 hour. The next 60 minutes passed slowly. Crew members prepared their stations. Damage control teams checked their equipment. Medics stocked the sick bay with extra supplies. Everyone knew what was coming, and everyone did their job without complaint. In the fighter bay, Price gathered his pilots for a final briefing. There were 40 of them, men and women from a dozen different countries, united by training and purpose. We are going to be the first wave, he told them. Our job is to draw fire away from the capital ships and take out as many enemy fighters as we can. It is going to be dangerous. Some of us are not going to make it back. A young pilot named Monroe raised her hand. Sir, how do we beat them? Their fighters are faster than ours. Smiled. Their fighters are faster, but their pilots have never fought humans before. They do not know what we are capable of. We are going to teach them." Back on the bridge, Daniel watched the clock count down. 50 minutes, 40, 30. The fleet had not moved. They were waiting, confident in their superiority. They expected the humans to run. They could not imagine any other outcome. At 10 minutes, Daniel gave his final orders. "All ships forward assault formation. We attack on my command." Commander looked at him. "Sir, they expect us to form defensive lines. They are not prepared for a direct assault." "I know," Daniel said. "That is why we are going to give them exactly what they do not expect." The clock reached 0. "All ships," Daniel said calmly, "engage." The human fleet surged forward. 47 ships, engines burning at maximum power, racing straight toward an enemy force 3 times their size. It was madness by any tactical standard. It was suicide by any reasonable calculation. But humans had never been good at reasonable calculations. The fleet opened fire. Space lit up with weapons fire, and the battle began. The first missiles reached the human fleet in less than 30 seconds. The relentless dawn shook as explosions lit up her shields, and alarms began screaming throughout the ship. But the fleet did not slow down. It did not stop. It kept coming. War Commander watched from his command ship with growing confusion. His tactical officers had predicted that the humans would form defensive lines and try to hold position. That was what every species did when facing superior firepower. You dug in, protected your ships, and hoped to survive long enough to retreat. But the humans were not defending. They were attacking. They were charging straight into the heart of the formation like they did not care about dying. "What are they doing?" demanded. "Are they insane?" No one on his bridge had an answer. On the relentless dawn, Captain Daniel gripped the armrests of his command chair as another missile struck the hull. The shields were holding, but barely. Around him, his crew worked with calm efficiency, calling out reports and adjusting systems with practiced precision. "Forward batteries target their cruiser line," he ordered. "All ships maintain assault formation. Do not stop. Do not slow down." The human fleet punched through the first wave of defenders like a fist through paper. 2 destroyers exploded as concentrated fire tore through their hulls. A third tried to turn away and was cut in half by the combined guns of 3 human frigates. Lieutenant Commander Price led the fighter squadron into the chaos. 40 small craft screamed through the battle, dodging between capital ships and hunting enemy fighters. They had launched over 200 fighters of their own, fast and deadly machines that should have torn the human squadron apart. But had trained his pilots well. They flew in pairs, covering each other, communicating constantly, moving as a single unit. When a fighter locked onto one human craft, another would appear behind it and blow it out of space before it could fire. "Stay tight," called over the squadron channel. "Watch your wingman. These lizards are fast, but they are not creative. They fly by the book. We do not." Ensign Tommy Brooks was the youngest pilot in the squadron. He was 22 years old, fresh out of flight school, and this was his first real battle. His hands were shaking on the controls, and his heart was pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. A fighter appeared on his screen, coming in fast from the left. Tommy reacted on instinct, throwing his craft into a spin that his instructors had told him was too dangerous for combat. The pilot, expecting a standard evasive maneuver, overshot and flew past. Tommy pulled the trigger and watched the enemy fighter explode. "Nice shot, rookie," said over the comm. "Do it again." Tommy grinned despite his fear. He could do this. They could all do this. On the destroyer Northern Star, things were not going well. A missile had punched through the shields and opened a hole in the port side. Crew members were scrambling to seal the breach while damage control teams fought fires on 3 decks. Captain Steve Hammond stood on the burning bridge and shouted orders over the noise of alarms and explosions. Half his weapons were offline. His engines were damaged. His ship was dying around him. "Sir, we should withdraw," his first officer said. "We cannot take much more of this." Steve looked at the tactical display. They were starting to regroup. If the Northern Star pulled back now, it would leave a gap in the human formation. The enemy would pour through and hit the other ships from behind. "No," he said. "We stay. All remaining weapons keep firing. If we are going down, we are taking as many of them with us as we can." The Northern Star kept fighting. In the engine room of the Relentless Dawn, Chief Engineer Torres was covered in sweat and grease. The main reactor had taken damage, and power was fluctuating throughout the ship. She had already rerouted 3 systems and bypassed 2 safety protocols. She was running out of options. "Chief, shields are failing," her assistant called out. "We need more power." Looked at her console. There was one option left, but it was dangerous. If she pulled power from life support, she could reinforce the shields. But if the battle lasted too long, the crew would start running out of air. She made her decision in less than a second. "Divert life support to shields," she ordered. "We will breathe when the fighting is done." On Deck 7, Ensign Chris Bailey was running toward a hull breach when the explosion happened. One moment he was sprinting down the corridor. The next moment he was flying through the air as the wall behind him blew apart. He hit the ground hard and looked up to see stars, actual stars. The hull had been torn open and the vacuum of space was rushing in. He had maybe 10 seconds before the emergency bulkhead sealed the section, maybe less. Chris did not think. He acted. He grabbed a support beam and wedged himself into an access conduit, pressing his body into the narrow space. Then he held his breath. The decompression hit like a hammer. The air screamed past him, trying to pull him out into space. His lungs burned. His vision started to go dark. Then the bulkhead slammed shut, and the world went quiet. Chris lay in the darkness for a long moment, gasping for air that slowly started to fill the corridor again. He was alive. He had no idea how, but he was alive. He got up and went back to work. The battle raged for 2 hours. They threw everything they had at the human fleet, and the humans refused to die. Ships that should have been destroyed kept fighting. Weapons that should have failed kept firing. Crew members who should have given up kept working. On the frigate Persistence, Commander Amy watched her ship fall apart around her. Every system was failing. Every deck was damaged. She had lost a third of her crew and the rest were barely holding on. A cruiser was moving in for the kill. It was 3 times the size of the Persistence, and it was coming straight at them. Amy looked at the tactical display for a long moment. Then she made a decision. "All hands abandon ship," she ordered. "Get to the escape pods. That is an order." Her first officer stared at her. "Commander, what are you going to do?" Amy smiled grimly. "I am going to buy you time." She waited until the escape pods launched. Then she aimed the Persistence at the cruiser and pushed the engines to maximum. The Persistence hit the enemy ship at full speed. Both vessels exploded in a ball of fire that lit up the darkness of space. Commander Amy died instantly, along with the 1,000 on board the cruiser she had rammed. Her sacrifice turned the tide of the battle. The who had never seen such determination, such willingness to die, began to waver. Their formation broke. Their coordination failed. Ship after ship tried to retreat, and ship after ship was cut down by human guns. War Commander watched in disbelief as his fleet crumbled. He had fought 100 battles against a dozen species, and he had never seen anything like this. These humans were not fighting like rational beings. They were fighting like they had nothing to lose. And in a way they did not. They had come to save strangers. They had nothing to gain and everything to lose, and they did not care. 3 hours after the battle began, sent his surrender. The humans had won. The silence after the battle was strange. For hours, space around had been filled with fire and explosions and the screams of dying ships. Now there was only quiet, broken occasionally by the crackle of cooling metal and the soft hum of engines. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge of the relentless dawn and looked at what remained of his fleet. Of the 47 ships that had entered the battle, 36 were still flying. 11 had been destroyed. Over 3,000 human lives had been lost. But the fleet was shattered. Of their 140 warships, only 45 remained intact. The rest were debris, scattered across the void like broken toys. War Commander was a prisoner, held in the brig of the human cruiser Liberty Bell. They had won. Against all odds, against all reason, they had won. Commander Lisa came to stand beside him. She had a cut on her forehead and burns on her hands, but she was alive. Most of the bridge crew was alive. That was more than Daniel had dared to hope for. "They are sending a shuttle," she said. "Their High Counselor wants to meet with you personally." Daniel nodded slowly. He was tired, so tired, but the work was not done yet. The shuttle landed in the relentless dawn's main hangar bay 2 hours later. High Counselor Ra stepped out and looked around with wide, silver eyes. He had never been on a human ship before. He had never seen human technology up close. It was crude compared to designs, all hard edges and practical surfaces. But it was also strong. It had survived a battle that should have destroyed it. Captain met him at the hangar entrance. The two leaders looked at each other for a long moment. "High Counselor," Daniel said, "welcome aboard." Ra bowed his head. "Captain, I do not have words to express what your people have done for mine. We owe you a debt that we can never repay." Daniel shook his head. "There is no debt. We did what was right, that is all." He led the leader through the ship. They walked past repair crews working on damaged systems. They passed medics treating wounded crew members. They saw the signs of battle everywhere, the scorch marks on the walls, the replaced panels, the tired faces of people who had given everything they had. Ra watched it all in silence. He had many questions, but he did not know how to ask them. Finally, they reached the observation deck. Through the wide windows, they could see hanging in space, battered and but still alive, still there. "Why did you come?" Ra asked at last. "We sent our message to every civilization in the galaxy. Most did not respond. Those who did refused to help, but you came. You came from the other side of the galaxy and you fought and you died for us. Why?" Daniel was quiet for a moment. He looked out at the planet, at the stars, at the endless darkness of space. "A long time ago," he said, "on our world there was a great war. Many millions of people died. Cities were destroyed. Entire nations were wiped out. And when it was over, those who survived made a promise. They said that never again would the world stand by while innocents suffered. Never again would good people do nothing while evil spread." He turned to face the. "We did not always keep that promise. We failed many times. We let people suffer when we could have helped. We looked away when we should have acted. But we never stopped trying. We never stopped believing that the promise mattered." Ra did not fully understand. On his world, species helped each other only when there was something to gain. The galaxy ran on trade and alliances and mutual benefit. The idea of helping strangers simply because it was right was foreign to him. "But the cost," he said. "Your people died. Ships that took years to build were destroyed, for strangers you had never met." Daniel smiled sadly. "They were not strangers. They were people who needed help. That is never strange to us." Below them, human shuttles were landing on. Medical teams were setting up field hospitals to treat the wounded. Engineers were working to restore power to damaged shelters. Supply ships were delivering food and water and medicine to survivors who had not eaten in days. Doctor was leading the medical effort on the ground. She was a small woman with gray hair and kind eyes, and she moved through the chaos with calm efficiency. She had been a doctor for 30 years, and she had seen suffering in many forms, but nothing had prepared her for this. The wounded filled every available space. Many of them had injuries that human medicine could not fully treat. Their physiology was different, their biology was alien, but and her team did their best. They learned as they went. They asked questions when they did not understand, and slowly, steadily, they began to save lives. Lieutenant Burke was coordinating the supply distribution. He was a young man, only 25 years old, with more energy than experience. But he worked tirelessly, organizing volunteers, directing deliveries, making sure that help reached those who needed it most. A child approached him, a small creature with silver skin and large dark eyes. The child was holding a broken toy, a small crystal figure that had been damaged in the bombardment. "Can you fix it?" the child asked. Knelt down and looked at the toy. He did not know anything about crystals. He did not know if it could be repaired, but he smiled at the child anyway. "Let me see what I can do," he said. He worked on the toy for an hour, using tools that were not designed for the task, trying techniques that probably would not work. But somehow, through luck or determination or sheer stubbornness, he managed to put the pieces back together. The crystal glowed softly when he handed it back. The child's face lit up with joy. It was a small moment, one small act of kindness in the middle of so much suffering, but it mattered. Every small act mattered. High Counselor Ra watched the humans work, and slowly he began to understand. These people were not motivated by profit or power or strategic advantage. They were motivated by something simpler and more powerful. They genuinely cared. It was such a simple concept, and yet it was so rare in the galaxy that it seemed almost miraculous. "I do not understand your species," Ra admitted, "but I think I am beginning to." Daniel nodded. "We do not always understand ourselves, but we try to be better than we were yesterday. That is all anyone can do." They stood together in silence, watching the rescue efforts continue on the planet below. The battle was over, but the work of healing had just begun. It would take years to rebuild what they had destroyed. It would take generations to recover from the trauma of the war. But they were not alone. The humans would stay as long as they were needed. They would help rebuild and recover and heal. And when they finally left, they would leave behind something more valuable than ships or weapons or technology. They would leave behind hope. "Thank you," Ra said softly. "Thank you for coming." Daniel put a hand on the shoulder. "Thank you for holding on. Thank you for believing that help would come." Outside the window, the stars burned cold and bright. Somewhere out there, other civilizations were watching, wondering what had happened at. They would soon find out, and when they did, everything would change. The galaxy would never look at humanity the same way again. 6 months had passed since the battle of. The fires had been put out. The dead had been buried. The long work of rebuilding had begun. And across the galaxy, the story of what happened was spreading like wildfire. No one could quite believe it. A young species, barely known, had traveled across the galaxy to save strangers. They had fought against impossible odds and won. They had asked for nothing in return. It was the kind of story that seemed too good to be true. But it was true. And now the Galactic Council had called a special session to address the matter of humanity. The council chamber was vast, a circular room that could hold representatives from 1,000 civilizations. Today, 112 species had sent delegates. They sat in tiers of seats that rose toward the domed ceiling, watching the central platform where speakers addressed the assembly. Ambassador stood on that platform now, representing Earth and all of humanity. She was a woman in her 50s, with short dark hair and steady brown eyes. She had spent her career in diplomacy, negotiating trade agreements and resolving disputes, but she had never faced anything like this. The entire galaxy was watching. Every word she said would be remembered. "Members of the Galactic Council," she began, "I am honored to speak before you today. 6 months ago, my people received a distress call from the planet. The civilization was under attack, their world was burning, and they had asked for help from anyone who would listen." She paused, looking around the chamber. Many of you heard that call. Many of you chose not to answer. We do not judge you for that decision. Every civilization has its own priorities, its own concerns, its own reasons for acting or not acting. But we made a different choice. We chose to help. The delegate shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The representative looked away. Many others found sudden interest in their data pads or the floor beneath their feet. We did not come to seeking power or recognition, continued. We came because it was right, because someone asked for help and we could give it. That is all. That is everything. The war speaker rose from his seat. He was one of the few who had not been imprisoned after the surrender, a diplomat rather than a soldier. His voice was harsh with anger. These humans are dangerous, he declared. They fight without reason, without calculation. They do not fear death as civilized species do. They must be contained before they threaten us all. A murmur ran through the chamber. They had been conquerors for centuries. They had destroyed civilizations and enslaved populations. But they had always done so with cold, rational purpose. The human way of fighting, the willingness to sacrifice everything for strangers, was something they could not understand. Turn to face the diplomat. We do fear death, war speaker. We fear it deeply. We simply believe that some things are worth dying for. Your civilization has forgotten what those things are. Perhaps that is why you prey upon the weak. The chamber erupted in noise. Some delegates shouted in outrage. Others applauded. The council chairman had to call for order 3 times before the room fell silent again. When the noise died down, the representative rose to speak. High Counselor Ra had traveled to the council in person, despite the long journey and the demands of rebuilding his world. He had something to say, and he wanted to say it himself. "We owe humanity a debt we can never repay," he said. His voice was soft but clear, carrying to every corner of the chamber. But more than that, we have seen something in them that gives us hope for the future of the galaxy. He walked slowly toward the center of the platform, his silver skin catching the light. They are not perfect. They are often foolish, frequently reckless, and sometimes cruel to each other. Their history is filled with war and suffering and failure. But when the universe is at its darkest, when all seems lost, they do not abandon those in need. He turned to face the assembly. The galaxy called for aid, and what arrived shattered every expectation. Not because humans are the strongest or the most advanced, but because they are brave enough to answer when others turn away. For a long moment there was silence. Then slowly the delegate began to applaud. Others joined him, then more and more, until the entire chamber was filled with the sound of approval. Not everyone applauded. They sat in stony silence. A few other species looked uncertain, uncomfortable with this display of emotion. But most of the delegates were on their feet, honoring the species that had done what no one else was willing to do. In the observer gallery above the main floor, Captain Daniel watched the scene with mixed feelings. He was not comfortable being treated as a hero. He had simply done his job. He had followed his conscience. He did not think that deserved applause. Commander Lisa stood beside him. "How does it feel to be famous?" she asked. Daniel shook his head. "We are not famous. We are just people who did what was right. That should not be special. It should be normal." Lieutenant Commander Price was there too, along with Chief Engineer Torres, Ensign Chris Bailey, and dozens of other survivors from the relentless dawn. They had all been invited to witness this moment, to see the galaxy acknowledge what they had done. Chris was still healing from the injuries he had suffered during the battle. The doctors said he would make a full recovery, but it would take time. He did not mind. He was alive. So many others were not. "What do you think happens now?" he asked. Daniel considered the question. "I think everything changes. The galaxy knows about us now. They know what we are willing to do. Some of them will fear us for it. Others will respect us. A few might even try to be like us." And the They will remember this day for a very long time. They will think twice before attacking another peaceful civilization. They will know that someone might answer the call. Someone might come. Below them, Ambassador was finishing her speech. She had spoken about humanity's values, about their belief in protecting the innocent, about their hope for a galaxy where civilizations helped each other instead of preying upon each other. "We do not claim to be better than anyone else," she said. "We have made terrible mistakes in our history. We have hurt each other and ourselves in ways that shame us still, but we keep trying. We keep reaching for something better, and we will keep answering when someone calls for help." She looked up at the gallery, where the survivors of the battle were watching. "That is who we are. That is who we choose to be, and we invite the rest of the galaxy to join us." The applause that followed lasted for a very long time. 2 weeks later, the human fleet left. They had begun to rebuild, and they no longer needed the constant presence of their saviors. But they would never forget what the humans had done. Every year, on the anniversary of the battle, they would celebrate Human Day. They would tell stories about the strange species from a distant world who had come to help when no one else would. Captain Daniel stood on the bridge of the Relentless Dawn as the ship prepared to enter hyperspace. The crew was tired but proud. They had been through hell, and they had come out the other side. "Set course for Earth," he ordered. "It is time to go home." Commander smiled. "Think they will give us a parade?" Daniel shrugged. "I hope not. I hate parades." The ship jumped to hyperspace and disappeared behind them. But the impact of what they had done would last forever. Across the galaxy, other civilizations were talking about humanity. They were asking questions, wondering what kind of species would risk everything for strangers. And somewhere, on a small world that no one had heard of, another distress call was going out. Another civilization was crying for help. Another voice was pleading for someone, anyone, to answer. This time, they would not have to plead for long. Because now the galaxy knew the truth. When someone called for aid, when the darkness seemed overwhelming, when all hope appeared lost, there was a species that would answer. Humanity would come. And that made all the difference.